Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Strategies for Manufacturing's Post-COVID Future. My name is Steve Melito, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's event. You'll have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect them and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's FuseHub presentation. Also, the recording will be posted on the FuseHub website, and you will receive via email a link to it. Also, please note that this webinar is brought to you by FuseHub, New York State's Manufacturing Extension Partnership Center. There are 10 regional centers located strategically across the state, and we're all part of New York MEP, a network of organizations that provides growth and innovation services to small and mid-sized manufacturers. So let's get started. I would now like to introduce the members of our panel. First off, Arvind Rangarajan, Technical Lead Additive Automation at GE Renewable Energy. We also have Dan O'Connell, who is the site manager at Plug Power. And we have Nate Pizzini, who is the assistant general manager for Kennedy Valve. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Morning, nice to be here.
So listen, how has the pandemic affected your business in the short term? Did you remain open? Did you need to close? Did you need to maybe reduce your workforce? Dan, let's go ahead and start with you.
Sure. Plug Power fuel cell forklifts move 30% of the nation's food supply, so we were considered an essential business. Our two biggest customers, Walmart and Amazon, began ramping up in March, so we were pretty desperate to meet their demands. We immediately started looking to ramp up our production and find ways to add resources. We've been very fortunate. We've had no layoffs, no furloughs. We've taken a bunch of extreme safety measures to make sure the health and safety of our employees, and we've continued to hire all the way throughout the whole pandemic. We've been working nonstop in manufacturing, on the manufacturing floor. Our engineering department's working from home, but we as a company donated some PPE to supplies in New York City to a couple of hospitals. We even started our engineering department working on a low-cost ventilator when we thought that would be a major concern. Unfortunately, with the concerns over health and safety and at the high level of unemployment benefits, we're still struggling to find qualified production workers. So although we're ramping up and we're continuing to operate, it's been difficult to find talented resources.
Very good. So Nate, are you seeing some of the same things? I guess for starters, how did the pandemic affect your company in the short term? Did you stay open? Did you need to close? Did you need to reduce your workforce? Or maybe are you having some workforce issues now?
So with Kennedy Valve providing critical infrastructure products for water distribution and fire suppression, we remained open under the guidance of both the Department of Homeland Security and New York State. So we were 100% open. We did take an opportunity based upon some corporate guidelines that any member of the team that was capable of performing work from home, we would get them set up to work remotely. So mainly our inside sales staff and our accounting folks, they have worked from home up until this Monday. They reported back to the plant this Monday with the southern tier opening up in phase 3. We had a very strong March and April. May, we saw a slowdown, and mainly that was related to the fact that I think, infrastructure projects obviously were starting to come to a slowdown. So May was a slow month for us. We have continued to hire through the process. Yes, we are having difficulty finding candidates at this point in time. I think, as Dan alluded to, there's not a lot of incentive at the moment to return to the workforce with the height of unemployment as it is right now. We did have to do a furlough of our foundry folks, but that was actually kind of a perfect storm of the situation. We had mechanical failures on 2 out of 3 of our iron furnaces in the same exact week that everything really started to come to a head So we had our foundry personnel off for about 11 days, and then they returned back to work and have been working steady ever since.
All right, very good. And Arvind, GE obviously very large multinational corporation. Can you describe a bit about what COVID-19 has done in the short term? Did you stay open? Did you need to close? Did you need to reduce workforce? I hope we didn't lose Arvind.
Yes, it looks like we lost our Arvind, Steve, on phone.
All right. Well, let's keep on rolling. You know, I probably jumped into this a little fast. This is a big event. Dan, could you just go back a little bit and maybe tell us a little bit about what you do and what the company does? I just want to make sure people understand Plug Power and its contributions.
Sure. Plug Power is the leading provider of fuel cell forklifts in the industry. We have about 95% of the market share. We bring forklifts into a facility. Generally, it's large warehouses where they're moving a lot of goods around. We displace the lead acid batteries that are currently in forklifts, or in some cases, even the propane forklifts that are out there. We bring in the fuel cells. We put in a hydrogen station right at the warehouse. Some distribution centers use up to 450 forklifts that run 24/7, so they run round the clock. Amazon and Walmart are our two biggest customers. We've recently signed deals with Home Depot, General Motors, BMW. Continue to expand our operations. Allows us to run very quickly throughout the entire 8-hour shift with full efficiency from the forklifts. And the hydrogen is very good at doing cold starts in the fuel cells. So we come in and out of the freezers at the food factory in Walmart, and we even have Wegmans as one of our customers.
Very good. And Nate, I think you introduced the company a little bit, but tell us a little more about Kennedy Valve and what you do there.
So most people probably will recognize Kennedy Valve for our fire hydrants that are above ground. That's the most readily recognizable. You know, Kennedy Valve's been in Elmira, New York, producing fire hydrants since 1907. But we also do valves for water distribution to your homes, fire suppression related to sprinkler systems, wastewater, water treatment valves. So really, if it has anything to do with transferring water one way or another, you know, Kennedy Valve's involved in it. We are part of a much larger corporation called McQueen Incorporated. So we're vertically integrated. We have, you know, pipe plants, we have valve plants, but really it's water distribution and fire suppression is what we do.
Very good. So listen, I'm hoping Arvind can join us again, but you know, just in case he can't, let's keep on rolling. You had both mentioned workforce. Look, it was a challenge finding good people even before COVID-19 came along. Another thing that we hear a lot about at FuseHub is supply chain. So Dan, I'm wondering, how did the pandemic affect your supply chain? What are you doing to reduce risk? Do you have any plans in place to strengthen your supply chain overall? What have you learned from this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. We had a number of parts shortages from our international supply base in the first quarter that really slowed us down. We were really struggling there for a little bit in the early part of this year. Parts coming out of China were especially difficult to get with all that was going on relative to closing down borders and things. It was very difficult. We've been working on pulling some materials from our China suppliers in the past couple of months before the pandemic based on the recent tariffs situation. So we were well down the path to kind of trying to qualify additional supply base in the fourth quarter of 2019. So that really helped us quite a bit. So when the pandemic hit, we scrambled to finalize the qualifying process for alternate suppliers to get them ramped up to meet our production needs. We tried to help our struggling suppliers by getting our non-recurring engineering funds there sooner, trying to help them financially ramp up their qualification process to be able to supply parts to us. We also sent some of our engineers around to various suppliers to help move them quicker down the path. The last several months, our engineers have been aggressively pursuing alternate raw material suppliers from around the globe, sort of trying to reduce our risk from not only China, but from globally. And then we've also vertically integrated a couple of parts where we're ramping up very quickly to make stuff in-house. But still, the raw material supply coming from around the world has been very difficult. So, it's been hard, but we've managed. It's cut some of our production, but in general, we've been able to come up with workarounds to keep the factory running.
Okay, good. Nate, how about supply chain at Kennedy Valve? Did you get hit by part shortages? Have you adjusted? What are you doing to reduce risk?
So, like I kind of mentioned a few minutes ago, with us being part of a larger corporation, McLean Incorporated, and being vertically integrated, we're pretty well positioned on major components. Really, the only things that we're, major components that we're sourcing outside of our corporation is fasteners and O-rings and some low volume brass components. We've gone through a process of reducing risk where we have a domestic fastener supplier set up that then sources globally, so they can produce domestically here, so that there was really no interruption in our supply chain for fasteners. And along the lines of how we structure ourselves as a lean manufacturer and we do our ordering system, we were very well positioned with O-rings and other things like that. So really no major interruptions with anything in the supply chain nature.
Glad to hear it. So
Hi,
Dan,
Steve, can you hear me now?
yes, I can. Arvind, yes.
Okay, sorry. Thanks. Sorry. I know. Maybe I can also take a crack at the supply chain question as well. I think from GE's perspective, our situation is very similar to Daniel's. We had a lot of trouble in the beginning with components and materials we were sourcing from China, but due to the tariffs, we had already started working on alternate sources, local sources, and things like that. And that really helped when we kind of hit some of this COVID situation. It did slow down production, but a lot of it is coming back now. So we are ramping up and getting back to where we were.
Okay, great. Arvind, tell us a little bit about what you do for GE, just as an overview.
Sure. Yeah. So my primary role is in developing technology solutions for all the factories in the GE renewable energy tier 2 businesses. So we make wind turbines both for onshore and offshore. We make hydro components and grid solutions, which essentially makes transformers and all those components as well. So I develop solutions that use additive and automation technologies to help make our production more efficient and lean.
Very good. And just so folks out there know, Arvind is not on video, although you can clearly hear him. So just keep that in mind. Another question that I think a lot of people have is about permanent market shifts. We're hearing that COVID's changed everything. We're hearing that it's accelerated trends. Maybe it's somewhere in between. Dan, what do you think? Are you anticipating permanent market changes because of what's happened?
Well, we've been very fortunate to have been able to meet our customers' kind of rapid increase in business over the last 4 or 5 months. Our product performed very well under the increased load. And so the customer's acceptance of our technology around fuel cells and forklifts has been pretty exceptional, right? We expect that our ability to deliver increased productivity at a lower cost point than the traditional forklifts, particularly during a crisis like this, I think really will serve us well these next several quarters as we see a rapid increase in acceptance of the technology as well as in our product's performance. So I expect we'll see additional orders going forward. So in addition, the interest globally in alternate fuels, clean technology, and being able to reduce our carbon footprint, be able to store reusable energy as electricity or renewable electricity as hydrogen and bring it back on the grid as necessary. Some countries are really kind of moving toward hydrogen infrastructure going forward. Germany, Japan, South Korea, and a couple other countries have what I consider really started to move toward the hydrogen economy at a pretty aggressive rate. So I think that bodes very well for us as we go forward. Here in the U.S., the recent move toward using hydrogen and fuel cells in the trucking industry is really positive for us. Our forklift application can readily be adapted to long distance trucking. So with our over 100 distribution centers all the way across the United States, between Walmart, Amazon, and some of our other big customers, we've got 100 distribution centers all across the United States. Really allows us to have the hydrogen infrastructure for kind of the trucking industry coming in and out of those distribution centers in our warehouses. The infrastructure is already getting placed in there. So I think as of next year, we'll be able to drive coast to coast and be able to get hydrogen all the way across the United States. So for us, I think the increase in demand with the pandemic has really helped us grow our infrastructure and grow the acceptance of our products. So we're really fortunate to be in this position right now, to having expanded all during the crisis. So I think we're actually encouraged by what's going on and our ability to meet the demand.
Excellent. So as we look forward at trends, I think a lot of people out there are probably also very interested in what you're doing right now. And part of that is knowing what you're doing to keep employees and customers safe from the virus. For example, do you have restructured shifts or more PPE? And then how do you make those decisions? Arvind, let's start with you. What's happening at GE to keep workers safe?
Yeah, so I think that's been the biggest change in what we have been doing as operations. So right now they've closed all the public places, so all the gathering places like cafeteria or places where workers tend to congregate in the factories. They have all been closed right now. There are a lot more locations where people can easily find PPE equipment, hand sanitizers, all the conference rooms. Even if people are in the same, for example, factory, there are no meetings in meeting rooms. People still kind of Skype into meetings as if they are working remotely. So there are a lot of precautions we are taking to make sure that we limit the number of people in kind of enclosed areas as much as possible. And again, all the office employees, I think somebody mentioned before, people who can work from home are encouraged to work from home. So we kind of keep the load in the factories as minimal as possible. I would say those are probably the near-term changes that we have done to make sure that we can kind of maintain that social distancing in the factory environment.
Very good. And Nate, how are you getting work done at Kennedy Valve while keeping people safe?
So, one of the first things that we did was, outside of getting folks set up to work remotely, was we divided the plant into functional areas and set up staggered shifts. So that way we could reduce the population density, especially in common areas like the time clocks and things of that nature. And, we even rented sea containers to increase break room capacity. We did some engineering controls, where it was possible. We reconfigured workstations. We did install Lexan partitions. We looked at options of increasing ventilation to improve airflow in areas. Really, a lot of it has come down to cleaning and disinfection. We have schedules set up for standard and enhanced cleaning. Those are also audited by like myself and our health and safety and environmental managers. One of the more interesting things we did, we bought a Tomahawk Power Mister, basically a mosquito fogger, and we have a schedule that we conduct mass disinfections throughout the facility with that, where we're going out with a diluted bleach solution, and areas that can withstand having moisture put on them, basically non-electrical type surfaces and contact points, where we're using that to do it on the off shifts. We are requiring facial coverings when there's situations that we can't maintain the 6 feet of distance. 6 feet of distance. Daily temperature monitorings are something that we're doing. We actually are getting ready to implement, it's called Tori temperature checking. It's basically a tablet with an infrared camera It's going to be a good tool because basically the guys are going to be able to come into the time clock. It's going to snap a quick picture of them. If they're within the protocols for the temperature taking, it basically flashes a green, lets them go. If they're not inside those protocols, it's going to do red, give them a set of instructions, and it's going to email plant management that, hey, this person, and it'll show them a picture of who didn't fall within the temperature protocol.
Some impressive.
And, a lot of these decisions for us were taken up with, we set up a task force between myself, environmental health and safety, HR, and we have 2 collective bargaining units within our plant. So committee members from those were put together so that we could review guidelines that were coming out and talk about the most effective way to get those implemented without creating too much disruption.
Excellent. And Dan, how about at Plug Power? You're wearing a mask. What else are you guys doing to keep everybody safe?
What both the other guys have said is exactly what we're doing. We do everything from temperature sensing on the way in, hand sanitizing. We wipe everything down nonstop. We put in plexiglass separators wherever we can, trying to keep the 6 feet distance. So we've pretty much done everything we could think of. Except for perhaps the mosquito fogger. That's a great idea. We hadn't thought about that, so maybe we'll try to implement something like that going forward. But we try to keep all the high touch points as clean as possible. We put door kicks in so you could open them with your feet rather than use your hands. Those kinds of things. But we'll look at the mosquito fogger. That's a great idea.
It's a very low cost investment.
And Nate, how did you come up with that? I mean, who had that idea?
It was actually our health and safety group across the corporation. They were having a weekly, basically conference call, kind of like this. And one of our folks down in Alabama said, I use one of these on my lawn. Why couldn't we do this? Because the premise of the disinfection is you want it to actually land on the surface and then dry on the surface. So we thought about the fact that if we utilize our folks within the plant to keep the surfaces wiped clean, then we go through with the disinfecting and we set up an effective schedule, we can increase and enhance the level of cleanliness in the plant.
Great story. It's a great application for a sort of unusual technology. So Arvin,
Steve,
yeah.
Steve, I just want to mention one more point before we move on. So, we talk about all the procedures that are in place. The other thing that, we did at GE, which I thought was valuable, was to also roll out training to ensure that, all the employees are, there is a specific awareness training where they kind of make them aware of all the things that are available for them to leverage and, who to report to. And having the COVID task force, like what Nate was mentioning, was also key. I think they had one point of contact whom you could go to if you had any questions or concerns that would be immediately answered. So I think that's a great thing to have.
Okay, good. And Arvin, there was something else I wanted to ask you. I think if you're a manufacturer, unless you've been under a rock, you've been hearing about smart manufacturing, data-driven analytics, all of these technologies, AI, for a while now. Do you think that these technologies will become more important in the age of COVID-19? How can they help companies weather the crisis that they're facing?
Yeah, so I think that's, right up my alley. So, one of the things that we have, in the last few months focused on is try to figure out how can advanced technology help us, weather this crisis better, right? So some of the things that immediately started getting adopted were, augmented reality type technologies and mixed reality type technologies. So, for example, for maintenance technicians and things like that, for troubleshooting, we use products like TeamViewer or Help Lightning that lets them kind of remotely show them how to fix an issue without having to be next to each other. So that's an application where, we found, advanced technologies like, mixed reality and augmented reality can be of big help. Another place in terms of AI that we have found is that, now with vision-based AI and deep learning becoming, very, I would say, mainstream, we've been able to install cameras that would kind of keep an eye on, who's getting too close. So it automatically would highlight things like if people get closer than 6 feet, it would pop up and show that person is red. So they can kind of look at it and kind of move away and kind of maintain that proper social distancing. There are also similar solutions that deploy AI just to understand how far away you are from each other without having to kind of think about it constantly. The other key thing we are starting to see and gain a lot of traction is automation, because having human in the loop mixed with automation can enable us to get back to production faster. So even people who are skeptical of automation are now starting to kind of see the benefits of having humans working alongside machines, so you can kind of share the workload as well as be able to easily maintain social distancing going forward.
So Arvind, that's very interesting. It sounds like you're saying it's not either or, it's not humans or automation, but it's automation and humans working together. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I think there are certain things which you can't replace what humans do, or at least you can't replace it cheaply enough. So I think for cost-effective solutions, thinking forward, if you have humans kind of collaborating with robots, I think that's where the future is from an automation perspective.
That's great. So listen, Nate, what's your advice to manufacturers about how to plan for ramping things back up? Some folks are just getting restarted. What would you advise them to do?
I think the biggest thing that has been a major help to us is really the level of communication that we've had with our folks, and really having that physical presence and communication where possible and being open and honest about things. We seem to have had a lot of great success with basically, boots on the ground out with the folks. So ramping up from a standpoint of, people are our most valuable asset to the company. So, making sure that everyone, feels safe, is safe doing their job, understands what they need to be doing during these time periods has really been a major benefit to us to keep our productivity up. And that's basically, I think, communication is probably the biggest thing I can tell you right now as far as advice to get back on track.
Communication. Dan, what about you? What would you say that manufacturers need to do as they ramp things back up?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things here. One is, I'm an old school kind of guy, I guess, but I always thought we all needed to be together in order to accomplish anything. And with the technology today, I've sort of changed my mindset that we could operate from home and still be very effective. And so I could look for resources anywhere in the United States, and they could kind of tap into them. And with Zoom or Teams or any one of the softwares now, it's almost like we can virtually meet. And so I can expand my horizons, if you will, on where I can tap into resources, which I think is really different for me. I thought I had to bring people in and pay the moving expense and get them into Rochester, but now I think I can change that. The other thing that we've always all talked about here is, the alternate supply base and qualifying them in advance of the next crisis, whether it's, a pandemic or it's tariffs or it's fluctuations in currencies. I think being prepared to service our customers will serve us well in the long run by having that, multiple suppliers. I know it's trade-off in cost because I can't put all my volume with one supplier. I have to get some volume to the other supplier to keep them qualified and ready to go. But I think I'm willing to give up a little cost to be a little more flexible. So, and sort of maybe lastly is, vertical integration is great, but you still have to have the raw materials. And so the raw materials have to come from somewhere. For us anyway. And so looking at local or US based raw material suppliers, I think is while it's going against my desire to have a big global supply base, it also makes my ability to get them in during those different crisis situations much easier for me to manage them if I have local or at least US based going forward. So those are just some of the things that we've learned from this pandemic that have really sort of changed the way we're doing business.
Some good lessons. And Arvind, what have you learned from the pandemic, and what's your advice about manufacturers that need to ramp up? Again, many were closed or many had limited operations. What would you tell them how to get started, how to do it well?
Yes, I think I kind of want to echo a lot of what was said before. I think having the diversity in suppliers is going to be key going forward. I also think, from a technology perspective, being able to adapt your processes, like for example, you saw how many people 3D printed all these components for ventilators and swabs and all these things using, 3D printing. I think that's a technology that's going to help you kind of reduce your dependence on a complex supply chain. So I think that's another technology that is going to grow in terms of its relative importance. I think those are, I would say, some of the key things we are going to have to kind of weather the next crisis when we hit it.
Very good. So listen, that concludes the panel discussion part of our event here today, but there are questions coming in from the audience, and it's a pretty good sized audience. So I'd like to ask you some of what we're being asked. And I think the first one right here is a really good one, and I'm just going to read it as it is. During the lockdown period around the world, emissions went down partially due to people working from home. Do your companies have the capacity to shorten the work week to achieve the same benefits, or maybe stagger your shifts, or do you encourage or support some work to be done from home? Do your companies recognize the importance of this approach towards the climate crisis moving forward? And Dan, I think I'll start with you because it sounds like you've had a change of heart about some things perhaps.
Yeah, we're all about sustainability here. So, we've seen the impact of staying home has on the environment, and we're really keen on that. So our primary goal now is to learn how to operate remotely so that we can cut down on some of the use of commuting back and forth, as well as lots of travel. If we can have a Zoom meeting rather than traveling to a supplier and do it virtually, that's great. I think that really helps. So I feel a little sorry for the travel industry, but I also think that there's an opportunity there for us to do some things good for the environment. So I think it's really broadened our horizons and ability to work from home.
Good. Nate, what do you think? Could you shorten the work week to get some of the same sustainability pluses that we've seen, or maybe stagger shifts, or what else could you do?
So I just want to say that I do agree with Dan in the fact that through this period of time, we've learned to utilize communication technologies differently. And, we've seen where having video conferences have been a major success. So I think that that's important. I think that there is an opportunity to evaluate how to use remote working more effectively. I think that there is maybe not a full work week of working from home, but I think there's an opportunity to look at how that can be done, because I still think that there is a major benefit to having the ability to go down the hall and be able to talk to someone, now be it with a mask on, but being able to actually physically go down and talk to someone rather than having to, always have to pick up the phone or get on a video chat or send an email. So I think that there's an opportunity to evaluate how to use remote workforce to benefit both the company and the employee.
And Arvin, what do you think? Could you
Yeah.
do
So
your
I
job?
think,
Could your colleagues do their job this way?
yeah, so I think, GE has conducted a lot of internal surveys, and I think the opinion is divided. It's similar to what Nate is saying. I think people are seeing that they could accomplish a lot from home, but there is also a lot to be gained. Like you said, walking down the hall and having a discussion. People feel like they're now overwhelmed with meetings, especially people who just work from home. So they get more time to think and do things or try things when they were at work than if they're working remotely. But I think the mixed option that you talked about, I think the management is coming to realize that having that flexibility to work a few days from home is definitely going to be beneficial in the long run. I don't think it's going to switch overnight, but I think there is going to be more flexibility going forward.
Very good. Let's talk about productivity a little bit. That's another question that came in, and I'll read it. And it goes, have you seen a decrease in employee productivity from either work from home or from employees having to follow all these new rules once they're back in the office? Dan, I can see that you're smiling through the mask there.
Well, that's interesting. I just find myself, I get a lot of feedback that people say, yeah, I'm real productive at home because I can focus and there's no interruptions. But they also say they miss the personal interactions that Nate was talking about. But I do think it's it's changing, right? And we're going to have to adapt to it. But in terms of being effective, I know myself, I'm over communicating because I'm on Zoom all the time, which is good, but there's also no boundaries. We seem to go a lot longer. I'm going Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom meeting all day long. And so while the communication is good, it's also very difficult. I'm as tired at the end of the day as I would if I was in the normal office, but it seems to go longer because there's just no boundaries. I don't have to commute, so that we get on earlier and stay longer. So it makes the days longer. I don't know if that's helping efficiency, but it's definitely taxing by the end of the day. My brain hurts.
Sure. In Arvind, a lot of the technologies that you're working on are all about employee productivity. What do you think about employees being productive while they're working from home? Have you seen a change, or have you seen a change when people go back to work that they're less productive in the office?
I think it seems to vary quite a bit on whether they have kids or not, and if they have young kids that they need to take care of. I think that makes a huge difference. I myself have young twins at home, so I would much rather be at work working from home. But I think overall, it doesn't feel like there has been a significant drop off. I think things where you have to physically touch and do things do get delayed by a few months. But most of the people are adapting, like Dan was saying, to this new normal. We are used to now having meetings after 9 p.m., which were not very typical before, or early meetings before 6:30. Like he's saying, like the day never seems to end. But I think tasks are still getting done because I think the customers demand it, and it's something you have to deliver on. But I think personally, people feel it's more taxing, but productivity seems to be about the same.
Very good. And Nate, at Kennedy Valve, I'm sure everybody's checking out the mosquito mister. How do you keep everybody productive?
So for the remote workers, it really was kind of a mixed bag. I mean, I actually, about midway through their furlough to home, there was folks saying, look, I can't do this any longer. When can I come back to work? It's not working for me. And then there was others that were like, boy, I could do this forever. So, it really is mixed results, kind of like Arvind, was saying. Out on the production floor, I will tell you that we did have some lost productivity as we kind of worked through how things were ever changing. Since we remained open from day one, it seemed like it was almost there initially. It was hour by hour, the requirements were changing, and you just never know who was going to come in to check on you, whether or not you were doing, what you're supposed to be doing. Obviously we were. But early on, I will be very honest, productivity was hit as we were learning how to function in the new environment.
Tough. Another thing that was tough, this next question talks about supply chain. And Dan, you had talked about building a network of local suppliers. How do you go about building or finding the regional suppliers that you need? What do you do tactically to really go and see them?
What we did was assign a couple of engineers to go out and just start blanketing the internet, trying to find folks that could supply the raw materials that we needed. It was a full-time job for a couple of months for a couple of people, and we were able to bring a bunch of samples in and test a bunch of samples. This was at the end of last year when the tariffs really started to hit. We started to get pretty worried then. So we started getting samples in and started doing the testing to see if they would meet our requirements. So it took a lot of work up front. And we're still not qualified as much as I'd like to be, but we're continuing to work on it.
Good. And Nate, I think I saw you nod your head to that one. You're part of a larger corporation. Do you have the ability to go and find local suppliers like that? And if you do, how do you go about that whole task?
Well, interestingly enough, kind of as Dan was saying, we had a couple engineers that we've tasked them, this is your project. We need you to go find people within this region that can satisfy our needs. And as he said, just start with blanketing the internet and then picking up the phone and starting to talk to people and then going through that whole sample process. It's interesting to hear that it's very much the same approach.
And Arvind, I don't think we got to ask you about supply chain before. Was your supply chain disrupted? Are you looking for new suppliers? If so, how do you go about that process?
And I think the answer is, very similar. Our supply chain was disrupted in the beginning, but I think, like I mentioned, I think the China tariffs prepared us a little bit for this. So we had already started the process, and we have, local sourcing organization in most of the countries, GE being such a global organization. So we just turned on in terms of strategy, to start looking for more suppliers who are local, right? Because we know the requirements, and it then goes back to qualifying the suppliers and getting them onboarded, which is a chore. So, you tend to avoid overdoing it, but now in the new normal, it seems like something that we want to be prepared for going forward.
Very good. So supply chain, undoubtedly a pain point, workforce as well. I think that was one of the first things we talked about, and not surprisingly, there's a good question here, and it's, have you considered outsourcing labor-intensive tasks, assembly, kitting, packaging, order fulfillment within your region as a low-cost source of labor? Is that something you could even do? Nate, is that something that you could do at where you work now? I mean, could you outsource that kind of stuff?
Honestly, I think there's very little that we could outsource. It would probably be a pretty significant capital investment for someone else to do what we do as far as our assembly and testing procedures. We use a lot of water. Every one of our products is tested with water, pressurized to multiple times the rating. So we could outsource it to a sister company, but I don't think there would just be a local regional place that could just take that on.
Okay. And Dan, is there an opportunity for outsourcing any of the tasks that you need to get done?
We always kind of evaluate whether we can do it as cost effective ourselves or whether we can outsource. We do some sub-assembly work or have some processes done outside and bring the materials into us, having been post-processed from the original material. So we're constantly moving around trying to find the lowest cost option there. And so we're open to anything that allows us to meet our customers' demands and yet still keep the costs in line. So it's a constant trade-off. We do use some local assemblers that do some sub-assemblies for us. So wherever we can, we're open to that, but it's not always cost effective.
Sure. And Arvind, I don't suppose there's a lot you can outsource in terms of kitting, but maybe I'm wrong. Is there an opportunity there?
Yeah, so I think the size of components that we build and the processes we do are very hard to replicate. I think, like Nate mentioned, in terms of not being able to do it as a supplier without heavy capex investment. So in this environment, which is probably not easy. So I don't think it's an immediate option for us, but like Dan was mentioning, there are some pieces where we could potentially get some part of it done at a supplier. Again, it goes back to qualification and making sure that they can meet the specifications for the incoming material and developing that trust.
Sure. So in the age of COVID-19, there's still things manufacturers need to do to keep people safe apart from the virus. So one of them is fire safety. And so there's a question that's come in. It says, how have you gone about annual safety protocols, fire evacuation practices, and engaged workers in abiding by them? Nate, have you had to do anything like this? The usual kind of stuff that you would do if we weren't in the current spot that we're in?
I think the biggest change for us as far as safety training has really been around not being able to do the group meetings like we do. Normally the functional departments will meet once a week, once a month. So we've had to move that to an electronic platform. So we have a platform called Pure Safety that we use. And so we've had to move things that typically we would have done face-to-face in a classroom to an electronic platform to do things. I guess we haven't thought about the need for a change to any of our evacuation procedures. I know that was one of the parts of the question you were asking there. I I don't think that there's a need for us to look at that, but really the training portion is probably the biggest change for us when it comes to safety.
Good. So Dan, along those lines, have you had an opportunity to think about some of these things?
We still do all the same stuff, but because we have less folks here, our big concern was during like a safety issue where you had to evacuate the building. How do you maintain the 6-foot distance and still get everybody out safely in a timely manner? So we had a couple of discussions on the floor about how to get everybody out. We'd split it up and go to different doors to get out depending on the situation. But it is a concern for us is how do you manage that during a crisis situation and still keep everybody safe from a social distancing perspective. But we came to the conclusion it's a trade-off. You got to get out of the building quickly. And so you sacrifice some of the distancing to get everybody out and keep everybody safe. And so we've had those discussions. We don't know the answer, I guess.
In Arvind, are you involved in some of the safety conversations as well?
No, so I was going to say, I think this is probably something that's not directly in my line of responsibility. So, I mean, regular safety discussions do happen. So, all the Kaizen events or the lean events that take care of safety are still happening, but nothing specific to fire safety that I'm aware of.
Great. So Arvind, we want to keep people safe. We want to give people opportunities. One of the questions that's come in is, are your companies creating job opportunities for our younger generation, new to the workforce, but who have lessening options for jobs?
Yeah, so at this point, I think, a lot of the businesses GE is not in a great situation right now. So, I mean, especially because the aviation industry has been hit so hard. GE is currently not in a position to kind of hire new people at this point, but I mean, again, it depends on how fast the situation improves and how fast the economy recovers. Right? And from renewable energy particularly, I think we see that as the future. A sustainable world is going to require a lot of renewable energy. So I think depending on how things settle down, they will reevaluate. But in current situation, I don't think GE is in a great place.
Nate, let's talk about workforce. If a young person wanted to get a job at Kennedy Val, what kind of skills do they need to have?
I guess it depends on, what you want to do. I mean, we have very tight relationships with BOCES in the area. There's several SUNY schools that have technical programs, Corning Community College, Binghamton, and Alfred. So we have tight relationships with them, really try to work with them as graduations start to come on, especially when they are in relation to like machine tool technology programs, the guys that are looking to do something with automation or CNCs. Really when it comes down to it, if you have a mechanical aptitude and you know how to, use some wrenches, some pneumatic tools, and have that kind of background, we're open to presenting opportunities. We have a lot of folks, a lot of young kids that have worked on farms all through their teen years that come to work here and are highly successful.
That's really good to hear. And Dan, what do you say about workforce, the younger folks who are looking for jobs? What kind of skills they need to have? How could they get a job at Plug Power?
I think Nate's spot on. We're looking everywhere. The workforce is pretty tight. It was before the pandemic, and I think it will be going forward, but we're hiring. We're looking everywhere to try and find qualified folks. If you've got mechanical aptitude, that brings you in at the manufacturing floor side all the way up to manufacturing engineering and quality control and process development. We've got openings all the way along the line. So lots of opportunity.
Good to hear. There's a question as well, and Arvind, I'm going to start with you, that talks about growth and growth models and how COVID has changed them. And maybe this is an opportunity to talk a little bit more about some of the technologies that you work on, but do you feel that COVID is going to change the growth models for them?
Yeah, I think so. I think we talked a lot about how digital tools are becoming more and more embedded in everything we do. So I think that's an area where I think people's skill sets have to grow. Everybody from factory have to start adopting these tools and be able to work with it, in a very effective way. As we look towards the future, we also see, a lot of potential for things like automation, like we talked about in the past. Again, that's an area where, we talked about all the mechanical skill sets that's required, and I think making things more productive, reducing the cost footprint of making products is always going to be key. It's going to be more key in this new world where the requirement is dropping. So I would say in all those areas, there's definitely opportunity for growth in terms of the people and the skill sets we want to have.
Very good. Nate, I think we're going to wrap up here on a positive note about growth. Where do you see the growth coming? How does COVID change it?
So I don't know if it's going to be directly related to COVID, but one of the things that we've been working on with growth is really about digitizing our product information. So we've been working with a couple different organizations related to building information management and modeling, BIM. Because what we find is that as younger generations of design and construction engineers are kind of moving into leadership roles, they want easier access to this information, and they want to just be able to go to the internet and search it and find that readily available, basically in some sort of a model format out there, and they can plug it into their designs, and if it works and it meets the specifications, it should result in an order to us to fulfill that. That's really where we're looking at for growth, and that's really more probably on the more the fire protection and petroleum, oil, and gas side of things, where we're working at on fire suppression.
Good stuff. And Dan, let's talk about growth. We talked a bit about clean energy. Do you think there are a lot of opportunities now that just weren't there before?
Yeah, I would say that, this really focus on, providing clean power with sustainable for our environment. I think fuel cells are the answer. So I think down the road, our growth is astronomical in my mind. We've got so many different applications that are above and beyond forklifts. We're working with Amazon at one of their airports doing tuggers. We've taken a look at FedEx delivery trucks for the last mile, making sure those are green going in and out of the cities, and then all the way up to passenger vehicles and on into tractor trailers. So the opportunity for us looks unlimited. And so we're looking at nothing but growing, and I'm hiring as fast as I can.
Sounds good. Listen, on behalf of FuseHub, I'd like to thank our panel. You guys have been fantastic. We've been listening to Arvind Rangajaran, who's the technical lead for additive and automation at GE Renewable Energy. Also, Dan O'Connell, who's the site manager at Plug Power, and Nate Pizzini, the assistant general manager at Kennedy Valve. Again, thank you for your insights today and answering all of the questions that came in, not just from me, but from all the folks who took some time out of their schedule to hear what you had to say. So for those who are out there, if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. The easiest way to do it is to email me at stevemelito@fusehub.com. That's STEVEMELITO@fusehub.com. And again, you will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. Finally, on behalf of New York MEP and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Steve. Take care.
Thanks. Yeah, bye.